So as some of you probably already know, on my second channel where I throw up stream VODs and stuff, I also do a lot of PvP coverage. And usually I leave it over there because I know most of you aren't interested in PvP. It's not the biggest aspect of Guild Wars 2, and we talk about lore and story, and we cover new patches and whatnot. In fact, I got a Winter's Day video coming for you guys very soon. However, this morning, I did a bit of a thought experiment for myself, which was impacting the PvP meta and assessing the balance pass that just came recently. And I produced this entire video 100% anticipating to upload it just for a handful of people who watch on the second channel. But now I'm at the end, and I think it's an alright video where we'll get some good discussion out of it, and maybe some of you want to watch as well. For those of you not interested in PvP, this is 100% skippable, and you can wait until the next LP, lore video, or Winter's Day coverage, as I said, comes up very soon. But I thought it'd be a shame to only show to a couple, and hey, maybe we'll get some good discussion. So here it is, guys. Hope you enjoy. I thought I'd warn you what this is at the start, and I'll be back shortly. So I saw what I think was an Overwatch GIF the other day. I don't play Overwatch, but when it comes to their balance patches, they have these summaries showing that the classes that got buffed, the classes that got retuned, the classes got nerfed. It got me thinking about it with Guild Wars, and so of course we just had the big December balance. I want to talk about what I want to see from balance coming forwards, and so for every class I have made 3 changes. One nerf, one shave, so a slight nerf, and then one buff. I've kept it more nerf heavy than anything else because I think that a lot of stuff in the game is power crept. I think the speed, the amount of things that's going on is way too high. And really, I think what Guild Wars needs is a refinement of what's there right now to improve clarity and the gameplay that we're all looking for, right? So, yeah, we'll see what we think. I've been multi-classing quite a lot recently, so I think I have a very good grip on the current meta. This is, just to be clear, purely PvP oriented, 100%, so there's not going to be any regard for anything going on elsewhere. You can put an asterisk next to every single one of these changes as PvP only. And as well, when there are functionality changes too that would be unlikely to be split because the devs don't like the same skill acting completely different in different modes, I have considered whether it would be bad for the other formats and generally stayed away from it. So yeah, we're going to go through all of the classes. We're also going to look as well, and I might do this after each balance patch. We'll see how you guys respond to it. And I'm deadly serious about everything I'm saying. I've carefully considered everything I'm about to say. So if it makes you uncomfortable, then we can have a good chat about it, because probably I've thought more about what I'm about to say than will actually end up in the commentary. But not only am I going to do each class, back to the point, we're also going to do gear and equipment. So let's start off. 3 changes for runes. What would I change? Well, first we have the nerf, and I would nerf Scholar. Especially after the big rune rebalance. Personally, I think that Scholar is way too powerful. It's kind of the absolute no questions asked slot you'll pick if you're going for that extremely glassy approach to combat. I prefer an idealized version of the game where if I'm playing that very glassy build, I go for something a little bit more specific like infiltration or fire if I think I've got some burning on there. But a rune like fire runes, they're just not relevant to the game, because whenever you'd want this rune, Scholar would be better. I really loathe as well the recent change in terms of removing counterplay. I don't even feel like, oh, that opponent's on Scholar, so I should remove him below the health threshold anymore, because they're still sitting pretty and happy on so much ferocity and so much power and whatnot. I think it hurts build diversity, and it's not interesting to counter. I think other runes with more specific interactions and things they're looking for offer more fun for the person using them, but also the people who are fighting against them. So Scholar, my nerf for Scholar is actually to remove it from the pool entirely. That's the nerf. I don't want Scholar being in PvP anymore. I think it should go away. Also, that, you know, refines the power creep level a little bit. Next, what would I shave? Well, I'd actually shave 2 runes at once, and I've tried very hard to only make one choice for most of this video. So this is a bit of a cop-out, and we're getting out of the way quickly. But I'm making a nerf to 2 Traveler runes, and also not Adventure runes, sorry, Traveler runes and Lynx runes. So these 2 runes are the movement speed enhancing ones. They both give you a flat 25% move speed. One is better for power builds, one is better for condi. So there is that duality there. But I find there's a ton of builds in the game right now. And especially when I'm enacting my own build craft, I nearly always pick either Lynx or Traveler. I just talked about Scholar being OP or whatever, but the more realistic builds, I'm always on one of these rune sets, it feels like. Also, that's a big contributor to, I think, a lot of the movement power creep, which is more detrimental to Conquest than a lot of the other forms of power creep in the game. And so, yeah, I would get rid of this. It would increase the importance of getting Swiftness around on there. It would actually refine things down. Don't forget, because this is a rune that affects all professions, it also means the people who are chasing you on these rune sets are also slower post-patch. So, you know, it's a uniform bring down. I wouldn't be removing these from the PvP pool. I do like the idea of them. I would be shaving them. They would no longer offer 25% move speed. They'd offer 15% move speed at all times. And, you know, in that way, I think there is still some value, and particularly slow builds might still like to use them. But you're going to still be looking for Swiftness and the actual pool of boons and counterplay that's available in the game. So yeah, that would be my shave there. And then we get to make a buff. The first buff I would do, and there's a million I'd like to pick, but we'll just start with this. Lissa is incomprehensibly only 3 condies into boons now, despite the fact that leadership exists that does the exact same thing in an AoE capacity. So I would buff this back to its pre-nerf levels of 5. So you have a definitive rune set you can use if you're looking for that extra bit of cleanse and transferal on a fairly renewable elite, such as I was using on Blighter's Boon Reapers a while ago. So yeah, I would just return this to 5 and pretty much keep the rest. There's a lot we can say about runes and the decoupling of perks from stats and whatnot, but within the confines and rules of this video, that's as far as we'll go. So that's runes. Moving on to category 2, we have sigils. The sigil that I would nerf, again, is a total removal. I would get rid of the Sigil of Agility. Now, I know it's a really fun sigil, and it's a pretty impactful sigil, an obvious sigil, and, you know, you're probably thinking of some builds that you have that use this, but I do think it's too good. I think it sneaks onto too many of my builds, and particularly as well, my recent experiences playing against core guards, I really don't like how this affects counterplay opportunities for certain builds. Core guard on a hammer being the biggest problem right now. Basically, the quick weapon swap, Mighty Blow, judges with almost no animation or wind up for you to see if they're careful before they pop their retail and whatnot. I don't think that's healthy for the game. I also like the idea of quickness as being the super OP thing, but is more of a team-oriented situation where you're actually relying on teammates to give it to you and whatnot, and that doesn't really exist in PvP whatsoever anymore. Back in the early days when quickness was like twice as strong as it is now, people used to give lich forms quickness and whatnot. I'm still very much inspired by and like the idea of. So one of my main things actually would be getting rid of a lot of self-quickness availability. And, you know, getting people to team up and actually interact with one another in more interesting ways. So, yeah, I would just delete agility. That would be removed from the PvP pool. I wouldn't have it there anymore. My shave is actually a pretty big nerf, I would say, as well. But it is a shave in my mind. I'm going to shave the Sigil of Doom. I'm going to make that, instead of a 9-second cooldown, I'm going to make an 18-second cooldown. To me, this is just an obscenely powerful sigil. It's a 5-second duration straight away. So once you've applied a bit of expertise there, it's allowing builds that shouldn't have poison, such as some Mirage variants at the moment, or easy access to poison, to have it in high uptime. Poison as well, it's not just about the damage, it's about the healing reduction, and I find that there's way too many power builds that this is too viable on. This is too good for helping you cleave down bodies. This is too good in your duelist side nodey matchups where you're denying the opponent's healing. Doom has been too good for too long. And I still like the idea. It's a really good tech choice. I would just make it, instead of every weapon swap, every other weapon swap. And that also stops a lot of builds that like run double Doom. Maybe they only run the one Doom now because, you know, you're not getting value every single time you swap it. So yeah, Doom is my shave. And finally, my buff. There's a lot I'd like to buff, but my main one is Absorption, which I'd actually tweak quite a lot. Currently, it's steal a boon when interrupting an enemy. What I would instead do is I would have it 3 boons, but you don't steal them, you destroy them. So the net benefit of the game here is that boons are being lifted away. I find the game's very boon spammy at the moment, and there's a lot of builds where I'm always looking at Absorption. I'm like, oh, this would be cool, but you just can't trust it. You can't trust that it will get the valuable stuff. And so now, if you score a good interrupt, and you're ripping a ton of, you know, might off of your opposing strength warrior or whatever, 3 boons is kind of the sweet spot for a lot of these, you know, boon rip elements in the game, in that a lot of people apply boons to themselves in 3, and you can kind of make them naked. I think that would be really good. And again, it's not stealing them anymore. The sigil as it currently exists just reshuffles boons. This I would just use to start removing them, and interrupt heavy builds may actually be able to have fun with that. The ICDA I think is a little bit clunky as well, but yeah, that would be my buff to the sigil of absorption. And there's another interrupt sigil maybe we can get to at a later date. So there you go, that's gear. Let's move on into the classes now in no particular order. I've got written on my notepad here Ranger, so let's start there. What would I change with Ranger? Ranger has 2 extremely powerful builds. They're offensive in their own ways right now. You've got the Boon Beast, which is an incredible 1v1er. Excellent on sides, has reasonable disengage potential and kite potential once it gets plussed as well. And the other build is kind of the Sikkim one-shot global from 1500 range build. Which one is worse to me? I actually think the Sikkim build is worse. Note that when I say worse, I'm not talking about in terms of efficacy. A Boon Beast is clearly worth more for a team if it's played well than a Sikkim build, right? One of them is more meta than the other. That's not what I'm talking about. When I say worse, I mean, is it good? Is it healthy for the game? Is it fun for the game? That's what I mean by that, which deserves being tweaked more. Despite this one actually being less meta, if you will, less effective, if you will, it's more offensive to my sensibilities. So for my nerf slot on Ranger, I'm going to be affecting Sikkim, but I'm not actually going to change the damage of the build. I'm not actually going to change its like output or its burst windows or anything like that. I only get to make one change, and I think the most impactful and important one in terms of increasing counterplay and opportunity for people fighting against it is I'm going to change one trait, this one down here, Unstoppable Union. My change is to nerf this to only be a break stun. It currently makes you unblockable. This is, and for 4 seconds. It's obscene. I'm not cutting the duration of it down. I'm getting rid of the unblockable access. Note that those builds will still be able to become unblockable by using Warhorn 5 while merged with a pet. It's just a more tricky setup for them in that situation, and harder to get full value out of a lot of their current bursts. This is an adept slot. Sorry, not minor. This is an adept slot. Having stun break on such easy access is enough. Then, if the problem becomes that there's too much projectile reflect and deflect and whatnot, then the most intelligent way to balance that is to look at those, because they're the problem. Projectiles are universal across all classes. There shouldn't be such a crazy, wild outlier gimmick of a thing like Unstoppable Union in the game, just to avoid that. They need to look at the other skills. So yeah, that's my nerf, and it's a big one. The rest of it, you know, if you want to run some really stupid build that can, you know, the stars align, can actually get the burst, fine. But now people can actually, you know, intelligently work around it, and that's the change I would make. So my shave is going to be oriented at the other build, the Boon Beast. Now, there's a lot we could change about that in terms of its boon application and uptime and stuff. I'm actually going to just look at Wilderness Survival. They've got a similar thing going on here to what Guardians have with Monk's Focus and taking meditations. In that, I think there's a little bit too much synergy. So the first Adept gives you muddy terrain on heal, right, which counts as a survival, which then feeds into Wilderness Knowledge, the Grand Master, which means your survivals cool down quicker, give Fury, and Condi Cleanse. So what I would actually do here is I would increase the cooldown on lesser muddy terrain to at least double, maybe more, so that you're not getting it every single heal, you're getting it every other heal, or, you know, maybe even third if you're not playing carefully with the cooldown in mind. So why I'm actually targeting this is I think this is too strong when paired with like kite potential and stuff. Let's say you're on Capricorn, you've been plussed. All you got to do is drop your heal skill as you climb up on the boxes, and you're crippling and slowing and doing all this nasty stuff to people as they try and follow you. I think this is way too strong. The Condi Cleanse on it as well is just too heavy. So basically, what I'm trying to do is force people away from this. In truth, it's juxtaposed with some other really nice traits as well. I also just don't like the way this literally muddies the visuals of the fight. I don't like the combo and synergy potential of just basically blowing your heal early to line someone up into like a stun lock situation or holding your Axe 5 over them. Looking at the same area of balance, if we can still consider it the same change, the GM itself I'd make some alterations to, specifically getting rid of the Fury that's on there. I don't see the thematic justification. Fury I think you get way too much of. It's worth more than normal on a Soul Beast. And while you obviously still have several other sources, hitting this one makes sense at least. It's very similar again to the Guardian GM, where they have a similar thing going on with Medis, even right down to, oh, this classification of utility skill gives you Fury now. The other big thing I would love to do as a shave, remember we can't really do a hard nerf here, and I'm kind of breaking the rules if I did it, but the other big one I would change is I'd look at the merged owl or bird abilities, and the massive movement that you get from those, that I would cull away. Again, because I think culling movement is a big thing that any balance patch should seek to do, and is a big reason for talented Soul Beast survivability. I'd like half the leap distance of that, at least, but we're getting a bit off track. So, finally for the buff. So here's where we get to do something exciting. Whenever I'm looking for a buff on one of these classes, I'm looking for a kind of an underutilized aspect. Maybe it's a classification of utility skills or a GM trait we haven't seen for a long time, and, you know, make it a new archetype of build being around. The idea, you change this one thing and you get a lot of impact out of that one change because it kind of opens up a whole new sort of ballpark. For Ranger, I'm actually going to change a GM, and it's going to make some of you cringe because of past metas. And believe me, I'm a fellow hater of this past meta, but hear me out. I'm actually going to change Nature's Vengeance, the Spirit GM. Now, I did not like the Zoo meta. That was one of the big moments that burned me out of PvP in the past. I didn't like all the Spirit spam, and I'm not an advocate for going back to that. This trait also is a lot of boon spam, which again I'm actually trying to refine away in several ways. However, one thing I do really like about spirits, especially, you know, now that they're immobile, is the sense of a ranger setting up the spirits near where they anticipate a big fight. Maybe they're defending close, maybe they push far, they're just outside of Clock Tower and they've hidden a spirit, you know, outside the walls or something, and the spirit is affecting the fight from far away where it can't be cleaved down, and you as the opponent get to choose, you know, whether you want to clear it out. A bit like what we experienced with Flesh Worms. I really like that gameplay, and what I also miss quite a lot, currently we see it a bit with Signet of Mercy on Firebrand, which we'll be talking about a bit later, is seeing res animations and retargeting to interrupt them. One thing that was fun about the old spirit meta, someone goes down, you see that the elite spirit starts doing its oak heart thing, and you go for the interrupt. I miss that stuff. I want it back. So I would actually buff this GM, not so that people are charging around with spirits everywhere or too much with the boon thing, maybe affect the radius a little bit, but what I'd particularly like to see is that elite comes a bit more into the fore. Maybe, you know, you can buff the GM or the elite itself. I'm thinking about this, and, you know, increasing the radius. If you don't take the Grandmaster trait, if you don't submit to nature magic, then you're not going to get that value. So I wouldn't want, and that, you know, means that the other range of archetypes we've seen would struggle to get it all at once. And yeah, maybe we'll see another thing. So that would be the focus of my buff there. Yeah. Next, I'm going to stay on Ranger here. I did do a little section for pets too, very quickly. Same format. We're going to nerf a pet, we're going to shave a pet, and we're going to buff a pet. There's a billion pets in Guild Wars 2, and so many of them are crap. I honestly feel like they could and should be treated as their own like little profession section each balance patch. So what would be nerfed? Well, the smoke scale. 100% smoke scale would be the focus of my nerf. And what I would actually do here is remove the smoke cloud. This skill would just become something completely different, which is mediocre, by the way. So this is your actual, you know, your F2. I believe that, especially as a soul beast now, where you can merge with the pet, rangers should be choosing, do they want a stealth pet that can help them get stealth, or do they want a pet that will allow them to evade in combat? I don't think that there should be a single pet that does both. Another thing I would really like to do is look at knockdowns on pets, and maybe we could affect takedown here. But I really like the idea of nerfing this smoke cloud, because then you can actually put it on something else, and you can say, hey, do I want the smoke scale or do I want the Black Widow? You know, Black Widow is now the one that's giving you that field so that you can stealth. Also, stealth is generally extremely uninteractive. I think there's too much of it on too many classes, and this would be a really important and valuable way of hitting not just the smoke scale, but pretty much every ranger build that's rolling around at the moment. So, yeah, well, we would nerf the smoke scale. The other one that I would change, again, is looking back at Boon Beast. I would shave the Siamoth So the Psymoth is mostly being ran right now for Forage, which can sometimes give you Plasma, which is super OP. It also sometimes gives you Stealth. So I actually love Forage. I really do. My favorite version of Forage would be the Ranger itself can't pick the item up, but the items remain OP, so it's kind of like a team supporty thing. I really like the fact that enemies can pick it up right now, even though that's really weird and probably shouldn't be there. So how would I nerf this? I'd actually just add to the loot table of Forage another 1 or maybe 2 items which aren't stealth related and aren't plasma. And that's just a nerf to Forage, because you still get those items, you still get the flavor of Forage where there's something environmental you might be able to pick up and use to your situation. But it's not so reliable that you're going to get the really, really strong ones. And yeah, I wouldn't want to break Forage or how it works, because I think it's actually a testament to the way Guild Wars 2 is set up if you look at some of their early discussions about the combat system and combo fields and whatever. So yeah, that's what I'd do. I'd add a couple more things to Forage, and that's it. For what it's worth, there's a lot of creatures. All the pigs do Forage. Maybe you could do it for them as well. It's just that this guy also has, you know, unflinching fortitude on there, so people run this more than the others. So there's my 2 nerfs to pets. What pet would I buff? So my first buff to a pet would actually be the Fire Wyvern. So Fire Wyvern is really cool with its F2. I think this thing's awesome, and those of you guys from PvE will know how brilliant this is when it starts hitting hard, how it defines how you move in combat throughout Heart of Thorns. Really iconic pet with a brilliant skill. However, it's super crap in PvP. The reason that the damage is super low in PvP is because, can you imagine how strong this would be if it was hitting absurdly hard as it currently stands? The Wyvern is evading while it's doing it, so you can't interrupt it, and it's going to force everyone off the node. But that's exactly why I'd want to buff this, because it's close to being a really good pet, if only Consuming Flame was a bit better. So my change would be to Consuming Flame of the Fire Wyvern. I would increase its damage, and perhaps its burning application, perhaps its pulses, but I would create a longer wind-up and animation on the cast. So it actually has to stand there, and there's a delay before it comes off. Once that delay is over, you know, then the node gets flooded. But I'd have a nice visual animation on it, and once again, it's one of those situations where players can react by interrupting the pet. I may even go so far as to hackily have it the Wyvern loses boons before casting or something, so you can't stab it. But then I also really like the idea of a Ranger specifically casting, say, Rampage as 1, and then the F2 to make sure that it actually, you know, the Fire Wyvern gets its ability off, and that's powerful, but, you know, that's a player popping their elite. And if the stab is too much, then maybe the problem's with strength of the pack, not the Fire Wyvern. So yeah, that's what I would do, and, you know, I'd have it as this big, impactful skill that people can react to. You might notice a theme, but that's a lot of what I enjoy about the game. Alright, so my nerf to Warrior is going to be to Rampage. Now, to tell you the truth, I don't actually think Rampage is as bad as many do. Maybe it's just because of the kind of builds I play that I've got a lot of on-access blinds and whatnot to counter it. But kiting away from Rampages and, you know, mitigating them offensively, I don't fear too much. I'm not actually that worried about. What annoys me about Rampage, and that I do think is over the edge, is the escape potential for the Warrior and the sustain that they get from it. And I know that that's in the flavor of the skill, but I think that's the bigger problem more than anything else. People who auto Rampage at the start of a fight and whatever, that doesn't worry me. But people who are intelligently using it to get away from points when they've been overextended and whatnot, I think it comes up too much. The skills themselves, I like the pace of them, the double boulders before you get kicked out. I think it's all good. All I would change about this is increasing its cooldown again. So a lot of people run Rampage now because the cooldown got dropped a lot recently. So my nerf would not resume it to the pre-buff levels. It would put it somewhere in the middle. The other reason I would target Rampage is because I think that the elite skill option and variety is a mess for Warrior at the moment. I don't think there's a good balance between the amount of Rampages we see versus Signets of Rage, certainly War Banners. Berserker's a whole other story, but Winds of Disenchantment got a completely unjustified nerf earlier in the year as well, and that's just kind of left everyone on this. So I would target this, and it would rain Warrior down for those who are too liberal with this cooldown, but otherwise shouldn't really change too much. My shave to the class as well would also be on this default build actually here. It'd be Bull's Rush. Bull's Rush, since becoming an evade, I think is a really ridiculous skill, and it doesn't need so much damage on it anymore. I know that peak performance is about your physicals doing more damage and stuff, and if this basically does no damage, then that trait interaction feels a bit crap. I would just cull the hell down the actual damage on it. And aside from that, I'd leave Warrior mostly as it is. You might think, oh, they need a lot more WP, but do remember, they did just have a big full counter nerf, and I'm still trying to figure out where I feel they are power-wise. So yeah, just those two utilities. I think it opens up some other slots. Some of you will be questioning why I didn't look at Shake It Off. I actually think Shake It Off is pretty balanced, just because the count recharge is so huge. Yes, it's a lot of ridiculous burst Condi cleanse, but you're not getting that every single engagement. This thing takes a long time to cool down. This is actually my idealized kind of utility skill. Huge cooldown, huge effect. Not spammable, dismissible stuff, which is what many utilities have become over the years in the game. The buff I'm going for, what do we pick? Well, there's a lot to choose. Do we return Winds of Disenchantment, perhaps? I'm actually going to go for Berserker, because I want some parity between the elite specializations and something valuable there. And I'm sure there's a better change that I could pick to bring this into prominence, you know, just with one Grandmaster tweak or something. But the change I'm actually going to make is to King of Fires, which is an awesome trait a lot of people don't even really consider or look at. It's the one that means fire shields explode, and the tooltip tech suggests it should do flat damage on there, as well as burning. The burning is a reasonable amount. There's been a lot of buffs recently to fire attunement and fire auras and where we get them from and what they do. So I think that there's actually a really interesting synergy and pairing. Currently we've got like Firebrand Scourge everyone thinks of, but I think Tempest sharing tons of fire auras out to Berserkers who scale wildly off of King of Fires is an awesome idea, but it's just not strong enough. So it seems the devs wanted this to do flat damage. Let's have it do flat damage as well, and a significant amount, so that you could play a Condi Berserker or a Power Berserker, and King of Fires would be exploding in people's faces if you are supported by the right builds. I like the idea of duos like that and interactions between two players, and that would be a very cool way to make Berserker, you know, really shine, maybe as a DPS-y thing in team fights where it's got that support. Next, we have Guardians. So there's two big builds I want to talk about here. First is the Core Guard that is bursty and has a lot of quality of life and utility on what it does. And also we have the Firebrand Support. Firebrand Support actually just had a ton of nerfs with the most recent balance patch, and I think is slowly getting more in line. I was very close to saying that I wanted to nerf the F1 tome pressure, because that's one of the big differences between a Firebrand and other supports in the game at the moment, just how much it can supplement offense. But instead of that, I'm actually going to look mostly for the big nerf at Core Guards. Now, Core Guards, I think, crowds out a lot of other interesting builds, just because it's so good at sniping down squishier builds while not actually losing too much sustain and quality of life for itself. A big part of that is the Valkyrie Amulet, which I do love that there's a build that's on Valkyrie Amulet, but it means they get so much vitality along with so much resustain from all the meditations and Monk's Focus. It's hard to know what to hit exactly about this, but I think I will go for Righteous Instinct. This is what enables the Valkyrie Amulet because it gives you so much crit chance. I just think this is too aberrative. 50% crit chance with all that retaliation that's on demand whenever you want your burst. This would hit both Greatsword and Hammer builds in tandem. I wouldn't delete the trait or anything. I would just reduce that critical chance increase by half. I would give it 25%. That means the build itself probably wouldn't change too much, but its on-demand pressure and guaranteed crit would go down unless you substitute onto a Marauder build, which means you yourself are going to be a little bit more punished, and I think that gives a bit more room to other builds. In general, it's kind of a situation where there's a lot of things that could be things, but the answer is to just play Core Guard because it does it better and it's not going to die so easily. So, yeah, but I do love Core Guard, and I love that we've got these two choices with Guardian. There you go, that's the nerf for Righteous Instincts. Next, I would shave Signet of Mercy. So we're looking at Firebrand this time. Now, Signet of Mercy is an awesome utility skill, and it's exactly the kind of thing I like in this game, in that you see the Signet, you go to interrupt, or say maybe you're a Core Guard, you launch the body, you're an engineer, you launch the body away from the zone that the Signet of Mercy is coming up. However, I think that the cast time is slightly too quick right now, only in sight of the fact that Firebrands can very easily self-quickness themselves once dipping in or out of a tome. Now, yes, it's also true that if it's been a very long team fight, and now finally you've scored the kill. The Firebrand might not have the luxury of quickness casting this, but in that situation, you also are less likely to have the CCs available to get through it. I think this is just a bit too accessible, and I really mean only a bit. If you look at other classes where there's a lot of res skills, many of them are like 3 seconds, and at 3 seconds they're unplayably bad. So I would change the cast time of Signet of Mercy to 2.5 seconds. I would throw an extra half second on the cast, which is only there to open up counterplay for your opponents, allow your opponents to cleave the body down a little bit quicker, but you can still get all the other value. And I think with that, we would see some Firebrands running Mercy, some others not, which is already a situation we're in a bit, but I think it would just reinforce that. So that would be my shave, Mercy of half a second. And that might even be too much, to be honest. Overall, what do we want to buff with Guardian? Well, in terms of specialization lines and whatnot, I actually think a lot of things are pretty well represented. People are even managing to get around with Dragon Hunters at the moment. Instead, I would actually look at the elites, and I'm going to go with Feel My Wrath. Hell yes. The other interesting elite, I suppose, would be Signet of Courage, but I don't want to play with Sustain too much right now. Yeah, Feel My Wrath. I would buff this so it's actually a little bit more of a viable slot for a Firebrand who wants to really aggressively support his team. And so how we do that exactly, I'm a little unsettled on. The first thing that came to my mind was the radius of the skill. Shouts at 600 may have made a lot of sense at vanilla, but again, I think there's a lot of mobility, even in combat these days. That means across the board, anywhere you see shouts that are affecting allies, they can feel a lot clunkier than they used to. So maybe increasing the radius, particularly because it's an elite shout, is something that's warranted. But it's already got a nice low cooldown on it. Obviously, the run you risk is popping it, and then the quickness on your allies gets immediately ripped. The Fury, there's tons of access everywhere in the game, so it doesn't really mean anything. Maybe adding some might on there. We've seen recent buffs to For Great Justice, to Blood is Power and whatnot, where they give heaps of might now. Perhaps Feel My Wrath needs the exact same treatment, so you get immense might, immense quickness, immense fury, all at once. And we saw with those other changes that they give tons of might in PvP, but not so much in PvE to affect that balance. Maybe the exact same treatment there. Even with buffs, I doubt this will become a big AT skill necessarily, but for casual ranked queues, which is the majority of this video, I'd love it. Next we have Revenant. Revenant's in a funny slot because I'm meant to be doing a nerf and a shave. And there's nothing intolerably bad, I feel, about Rev at the moment. So it's tricky for me to say. My nerf, what I'm going to go for is Devastation. I'm going to go for Assassin's Annihilation, the GM slot. Just because this is the go-to easiest pick nearly all the time. It's so much extra pressure and sustain. The thing that I would nerf about this is actually the Life Siphon healing. Sure, you can have that bit of aggression on there as well, but I think this would help to solidify Revenant's role as kind of that assassin-y, pressure DPS-y thing. And, you know, really help it to be a build we know flourishes when it has formal support, but is less so without it. It is much more reliant on active mitigation. The other reason I would pick Assassin's Annihilation over other things is just because maybe then it makes Brutality and Swift Termination look a little bit more interesting, which are, you know, just not great picks compared at the moment. Again, it's not a very significant change, but then I don't think that Rev really needs very significant changes, unless I'm forgetting something major. So my shave, or the second shave, if you will, would actually be over with Herald Facets. What I'm going to shave is Elemental Blast. That's the flip over here on the Swiftness, and creates the pulsing damage area. What I'm going to do here is reduce the damage on the blast, which you might think, wow, is that really that significant? It is significant when you are kiting away from a Revenant and you've successfully done some kind of JP or got to a location that he can't quickly aggress you. You've baited out both of his teleport cooldowns and now you've run away, but he's just going to cast this on you instead. I don't like that. That's always been very frustrating against Revs. I think that the power of it as a ranged skill on what is otherwise a fairly melee-oriented kit is too much. I think it does have its use and it should still be there, and you don't want to make the Revenants feel too hamstrung, but I think this just does a little bit too much damage. I would just shave it down. You've still got your other ranged options. You've still got your Sword 2. You've still got your Shiro Elite if you need it to, you know, hit and stun someone who's far away. You'll have your opportunities. It's just this, I think, is too strong for forcing people off of, you know, narrow places that they've skillfully got to, and you, the Rev, have messed up. What do we buff next? Well, we saw that ArenaNet were looking at the Retribution line in the most recent update. My one buff change is actually going to be looking more at Corruption and Malik's playstyles, which I really adore and have been trying very hard to find if there's any value in them whatsoever. And the main problem here and thing that I'm going to change as a buff is Pulsating Pestilence. This is an excellent trait that means you Condi transfer every time you legend swap, and theoretically opens up that kind of melee Condi playstyle that Malix has built in, because now when you get counter Condied, you can splash it all back out around you. It's AoE on 5 targets as well, so it's not just 3 conditions copied. If you're against a Mesmer, you will full cleanse yourself because you'll put Condis on all of the clones around you, and you'll put it hopefully on the Mirage themselves. So it's a really, really cool trait, but there's a couple of problems with it. Number one, the ICD is 10 seconds, not 7, so quite often you legend swap and you're dead. I don't know why that's 10 seconds. I would change that to 7 straight away. Again, I would increase the radius just a little bit up to 300 because it's very clunky and quite often it misses. And then lastly, I would change it out of the GM slots, perhaps make it a master instead of lesser banish enchantment here, which is kind of crappy in its own ways we can talk about another time. But the main reason why this should move out of the Grandmaster slot is because it currently competes with Maniacal Persistence, which is where you inflict yourself with torment while using skills. So the idea is you inflict yourself with torments, and then you want to transfer it back to your targets. But how? Because you can't take both at once. So move Pulsating Pestilence down a rung, and you can actually have the build that combines the both of them, and all of a sudden you're able to do damage and interact and do fun Malixy things. And I think that would be very cool. So three slight tweaks to Pulsating Pestilence, and overall I think that would be a pretty significant buff to that playstyle. So let's look at Thief. So Thief, the nerf is very obvious to me. I'm surprised that there wasn't one with the most recent patch. It's Daggerstorm. So Daggerstorm got buffed recently to become an evade, which is truly insane. This has added an extra tool for thieves to escape, to continue pressuring, to cleave bodies, to do an ungodly number of things. It's very, very, very strong. Now, I love the idea of thieves actually using Daggerstorm now, but it is utterly crowded out the other elites. In most scenarios, I mean, some Deadeyes you will find are on Shadow Meld, but this needs to be addressed. The way I would address this is, first of all, I would remove the daggers that come flying off of it. You can keep it as point-blank AoE damage, that's fine, but I think that the, like, 1200, it's 900 range, it says on the tooltip there. Those daggers that come flying off hit way too hard, way too regularly. The Thief will, in the Daggerstorm, will still have ranged access because this thing itself is a reflect, and they'll get that. The daggers coming off are too much. Just have it as a point-blank AoE that players can actually kite a little bit more effectively around now. Another thing I'd love to change about this is stopping thieves being able to steal in the middle of it, which again is another thing that they use as a potent gap close. You know, the Daggerstorm will bait dodges, which means you can guarantee your steal lands like 100% of the time, and then you put the storm back on top of them. So I'd love to be able to stop thieves being able to steal in it, but that's more of a global mechanic thing, and I'm not sure is possible. And last of all, there's a lot of talk about how you can double or triple cast this because it is a trick that can, on RNG, get refreshed by the improvisation trait. So you steal, and oh look, Daggerstorm's back up, and then you steal, and it's back, which means it's kind of spammy to use effectively. You want to make sure that it's on cooldown at the start of a fight, essentially, so that every steal you do has a chance of bringing it back, and you get more value. I think all of that is ridiculous. Maybe you can stop it being a trick that changes that, but I actually think there needs to be a deeper look at improvisation altogether as a trait. I'm not sure what build this is. I haven't played this character for ages. I think the improvisation itself actually is more of a problem. So yeah, and maybe with those changes we can find some more parity between them. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I do actually miss Basilisk Venom. Yeah. Next, so that's my nerf, Daggerstorm nerf. It's still the evade and stuff and the get out of jail free card that we were talking about. Next, I'm going to look at sword for my shave. So I might be a bit biased about sword because I've always really struggled against SD Thief. A lot of the playstyles I've enjoyed over the years have relied on blocks and boons and have been low on stealth and escape potential, and they just get be stung to death by these SD Thieves that are really gross. So maybe I'm a bit biased, but I do think it's way too strong, and a lot of people are obviously on SD. It's crowded out DP these days. The change I would make to sword would actually be the skill 2. I would look at Infiltrator's Return. So you can create your port, right, and you can move really far away from it, and return lets you come back at any point in the next 15 seconds. What I would change about this is simply, and this is a shave, not a nerf, I would increase the initiative cost of returning. Now, any initiative change you have to be very conservative about. Even just a single initiative increase on a lot of Thieves builds makes them feel way more tricky and clunky. So I'm only saying 1 initiative for now. Maybe 2 would be the push. But I think it's too easy for a good Thief to just spam dipping in and out, basically, to kill people for free. There's so little counterplay to this when you're on the receiving end, especially on maps like Skyhammer, where they establish a port on like the roof above you or behind a wall, and they're just dipping backwards and forwards. You've got nothing. It's one of the most frustrating, lame things to fight against. And so upping the initiative on that means that they can't quite so liberally utilize that technique, and maybe they're relying a bit more on flanking strikes, and I can watch for the end of the evade and get a CC at the end or something, and I can actually counter them. So yeah, that's my shave. It's Infiltrator's Return. I wouldn't touch the Condi Cleanse on it or whatever. I think there's a very tight balance for that on Thief right now. I'd just look at the initiative. For the buff on Thief, again, I'm going to try and encourage a new play style or idea or fun thing. I'm going to look at a utility skill, and I'm going to look at the traps. What I'm going to buff is Shadow Trap. Shadow Trap's a fantastic skill with some really interesting interactions. It's kind of like your own mini portal to get anywhere you like on the map very quickly. I mean, sometimes there can be path grid issues with it, but just that idea of you've hidden this thing and your enemy might unwittingly proc it for you, and you know, now you can travel really far. I really enjoy. So my change to this, my buff, would actually be a bit of a functionality rework in terms of the way the flip over works. I would make Shadow Trap an ammunition skill. So when you proc it, it doesn't flip over to return. It's instead you can place multiple Shadow Traps at once throughout the map. And and you can't any longer on demand travel back to them. An enemy has to proc them for you to travel back, but when that happens, that's when it flips over. And I would give it an ammo of like maybe 3 or even 4, so you can place them at various chokes across the map, and as you're running around doing your thiefy things, sometimes you'll see it procs, you hit it, you don't know which of your nests is triggered by the enemy, but you popped over and maybe you've got some kind of opportunity. I think that could be a really fun and interesting skill, kind of Teemo-ish experience from League. And, you know, if it becomes overpowered at that point, it's quite easy to shave from there because you can just tweak the ammunition it has. Maybe later as well, Ambush can have similar treatment to allow you to spam out AI, but let's be real, that's a bit of a silly thought, and we don't want to turn this into PvE. Maybe for other formats, that'd be kind of fun. But yeah, I'd have Shadow Trap be an ammo skill, and I think there's a lot of fun things you could do there in terms of where you set these up and how they work. When it comes to Engineer, there's about 100 changes I'd like to make, to be honest. It's one of those really wonky classes that's highly overrepresented with one of its elite specializations, the Hollowsmith, and very underrepresented with core specialization, just Engineer, and with Scrapper. I'd like to have the later of those two be much more interesting and Hollow less dominant, but we can't make too many changes, so I'm going to have to be very precise about what I go for. And there are a ton of different areas of Hollow I would like to nerf. Its role at the moment in its ridiculous damage output, its kite and escape potential, and its CC, I think, are through the roof, particularly combined with one another. Even within the Hollowsmith traits, I don't really like how dominant one of the GMs is compared to the others, so where do we go? Well, let's just focus, I guess, on interactivity and you know, how it feels to fight against them, what's frustrating, and I will start there. So I'm not actually, you might not think I'm going to hit it too hard. First of all, my nerf is going to be to Elixir S. And this might be a bit of a mistake considering it's a core Engineer element, not just Hollow, and I've kind of nerfed everything here. But hear me out. Elixir S I find to be, by far, and through most of the history of Guild Wars 2, one of the most powerful utility skills, and especially utility skills on this profession. Just the active alone is super good, and we obviously saw the traded version of this be nerfed recently, so I'm going to recommend this. No, I'm not going to say that this becomes the exact same thing. What I'm going to change actually is I will leave the invulnerability, the actual mini form. I think that's fine, and especially without the trait proccing to double this, I've got nothing wrong with this, and I think it's really useful and necessary as an NG to get those safe stomps in on occasion to escape and whatnot. What I think is that this is so strong, it doesn't justify having a very strong toss on it as well. So I'm actually going to affect, with my nerf, toss elixir S. It is currently 5 seconds of stealth. Stealth is very uninteractive. Stealth, I find there is too much of in the game. What this allows Hollows to do very often with their surprise engages on people, I find pretty gross. Its escape potential, I find pretty gross. One of the things I do like about Toss Elixir S is saving someone's life with it when they're in down state by throwing it at the last second before a stomp finishes, and you've got the timing just right so that the person who's down auto attacks don't reveal them or whatever. I really like that, so I still want the stealth to be there, just not 5 seconds. It's way too much. I would bring that all the way down to 2, or maybe if I was feeling particularly aggressive, 1. This is the nerf, and I think even then you would still see people running Elixir S, just because the stomp potential again of the invulnerability and whatnot is extremely strong. Being able to drink this and get lots of support from your Firebrand who's healing you up while the enemy team can do nothing. This has got a lot on it. It doesn't justify such a powerful thing here. And I'd like to see, you know, some other utility skills perhaps get stronger equivalent so that we see that this is subbed around a little bit more. So that's my nerf. Functionally, things wouldn't change very much. It's just less stealth and surprise, engage, and disengage. For my shave, I'm actually going to shave one of the skills in the Photon Forge that I just think is a little bit too big at the moment, and that's the Photon Forge 5, Holographic Shockwave. The range on this is 600. I think it's too much. Too often, I'm really far away from the holo, and I'm still getting clipped by this. Too often, because of the way this works with the Z-axis as well, it CCs people in a number of scenarios that I don't think any skill like this really should. I would shave this. I still like the ability. I still love holo for its clear-cut animations, and, you know, you can tell when this is coming and dodge it, whatever. But the random CCs that often come from this, it's just got too much quality of life. I would drop its 600 range down to 500. And that might be too much, to be honest. Again, this is only meant to be a shave. 500, when we're talking in terms of radii for, you know, ring type effects, dropping a whole 100 off of that is quite a lot, but I think it's justified, and yeah, that might not be easy for the devs to do because it means changing the animations and stuff, maybe. You know, the wombo combo dream of an overcharged shot, a holographic shockwave, and the prime light all together is really dangerous, but that's kind of the makeup and big part of the fun of playing a holo, so I don't want to kill the possibility of it. I just want to refine in the range on that. We can only make 2 changes. Maybe some would also be quite impactful, but you know, there is some variety around. Not everyone is on the Photon Wall. Some people do run Spectrum Shield. Some people are on AED lately, and some people are on Heal Turret. So I don't know. AED might be overpowered, but I also think that people just aren't counterplaying it properly in a lot of ways. So, and I haven't had too much experience against it just yet, so I'm not going to talk about that so far. But yeah, so that's what I would change for the downsides to Holo. As for the rest of Engineer, what I would look at actually is Scrapper, because I do like Scrapper. It's just I don't think that it's really got enough space right now. And again, I would look at a utility skill for the support Scrapper angle stuff. Is the Bulwark Gyro. And specifically Watchful Eye, which is what this thing applies when you equip it. Watchful Eye basically means the gyro is meant to be taking the damage, and he reduces your damage. It's by 33%. What I would do is buff him massively so that he's harder to die, and we can actually, he'll absorb more health from us. And I would also change Watchful Eye to not just reduce flat damage, but also condition damage. If Watchful Eye reduced damage and condi damage by 33%, suddenly it would be looking a lot better. And that would be my first big change to Scrapper. There's stuff like fixing the function gyro bug and some other quality of life things, but nearly every single profession in the game we can say something, you know, that's broken and should be probably changed. So I'm just going to stick with, you know, general skill changes for this video there. So yeah, I would have Watchful Eye, reduce condition duration too. Next, let's look at Mesmer with my axe shield-wielding monkey here. So Mesmer as well, I think, is obscenely powerful, and I really detest a lot of what it is and how it affects spectatability in PvP. We saw a very significant change to the class with Portal recently, which might be a good first step to bringing all of its power sort of uniformly in line now. But so, what do I want to change about this? Well, first of all, I'm going to nerf Mirage Axe. There was a flat power nerf on Axis of Symmetry last release. It's insane to me that they thought that the flat damage on that was the biggest issue. No, it is very high, to be honest with you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to nerf Lingering Thoughts, and the main change I'll make here is the cripple on it. So the idea of Lingering Thoughts is when you use it, it creates this blob behind you, and if the enemy is standing next to that blob, after it ends, it creates a clone. The problem is you've just Axe 2'd through them and they're going to be crippled, and this goes off and it succeeds at creating a clone nearly every time. I think you remove the cripple on that, and it means a lot for this kit. I think that you actually be able to chase away, run away, from a lot of Mirages now. I think you can even to some extent run out of Axes of Symmetry. I think the cripple is probably there because in playtesting, the devs felt that Axe felt crap and that it was missing a lot against particularly mobile targets, but that should be the counter for this weapon set, I think, which is massively power crept. You'll notice I'm not actually changing the pressure on it. You'll still get the dream, you'll still be able to do that stuff, but now there's actually an avenue of avoiding it as the other player. Also, let's remember that a lot of these builds can pick up cripple on Cry of Frustration anyway, which you're often using at the same time as Lingering Thoughts. So, you have your own ways of putting cripple. There are other CCs. Teams can collaborate with one another to make sure that that lockdown is in place for the Axe to actually land its burst and do its stuff. So, yeah, this is clone denial as well in that one change, because it means that this happens less. The clone denial means less value on shatters. It means less visual clutter. It means less of a lot of everything. And that's all I'd do. I would say that's a nerf, and I would just get rid of the cripple and Lingering Thoughts. Next, I would shave, also Mirage, I would shave Nomad's Endurance, this minor trait here, which is that shatter skills give vigor. I would remove that. All this minor would do is that while you have vigor, you have extra condition damage. That's more than enough. Again, I don't believe that Mirage should have its own baked-in win conditions here. I think if you want vigor, you look at other areas of Mirage. You look at rounding your build out properly. You look at getting it from other people. I don't believe that they should get so much vigor access all on their own, and I would just shave that away. Again, that also hits boon juggling and all that stuff that's currently in the game, so pretty much in line with everything I'd want to do. So, those are the two shaves, the two nerfs. My buff for Mesmer, I'm actually going to look at Mower. I love Mower. I think it's a really big, impactful, awesome skill, good animation. You know, I miss the days of interrupting and watching for that. These days, even with the jaunt nerf, you don't really see mowers running around. You see mostly jaunting, you see mostly other stuff, you see gravity wells from the chronos. So, it's got some hot competition. What I would do to buff this is not change the duration of the mower. I think the reward is already there. You know, there's already more than enough time to burst the person down. I wouldn't change the mower's skills or anything like that, though maybe that could be fun. What I would actually do is just change the cooldown. It would get a treatment similar to what Rampage got earlier in the year. You drop it to a point that people like using it again. But with the lower cooldown, I would also increase the cast time by an extra 1/2 second. That's all it would be, an extra 1/2 second, just so that people can see it and dodge it a little bit more comfortably. And in exchange, I would put that all the way down to 120, which, by the way, is the sweet spot, considering that they already have 180 and they already have a 90 seconds. So 120-second cooldown on Signet of Humility, and I think you'd see that some more mowers are running around and the game would be more interesting and fun to play. Next, we have Ellie. So a lot like Revenant, I don't find anything too egregious about Ellie. Ellie is widely regarded to be the worst PvP profession at the moment. It's been in this place many times in the past, and then, it's been revived by DD Ellie incarnations and then fallen back into the pits. There are really two variants of Ellie that you'll find right now. One is a mediocre sword side-noding duelist build. The other is an even worse, bursty, fresh air, sort of ranged pressure build that nonetheless is countered very heavily by, and just the role is performed better by stuff like Core Guard, as we talked about before. Neither builds are that good, but I have to do two nerfs. So what do I pick? Well, it's going to have to be the stuff that feels least interactive, least fun to play against, and sadly for sword weavers as well, especially, that kind of means a lot of evade uptime. They need that evade uptime, really, because it takes them so long to score a kill, basically, slapping people with the wet noodle that is the sword. What I would change, though, is not sword on its own. I'd change all Weaver incarnations with Twist of Fate, which is such a strong utility. It's obscene. What I would do is actually not change the count recharge, which is currently at 40 seconds. What I would change is the cooldown between casts, which is currently 5 seconds. So I can twist a Fate, and 5 seconds later I can twist a Fate again. I would double that. I would make it so that you can only twist a Fate once every 10 seconds. And this, we're calling a nerf. In some ways, it might actually be a bit of a buff because it means that people won't spam their defensives too fast and they'll pace themselves a bit better. But what this means, practically speaking, if you're playing against an Ellie, after you've seen the first twist of Fate, you're pretty much guaranteed to know you're just watching for regular dodges and sword stuffs now, because it will be a while before the next one comes up. So, I mean, it's almost like a lateral change, but again, I'm kind of reticent to nerf too heavily things. What do you guys think is the worst thing about sword? I'm kind of lost with it, to be honest. The shave as well, I would make, again, is almost a bit of a non-change, but Woven Stride, I don't see the point. A lot of Sword Weavers are running this at the moment for the regen, and the regen starts cleansing and whatnot. That's all fine. But Swiftness becomes a little bit more potent. That's such a lame, bloated, weird aspect of this. It feels clunky with the new speed runes that are in the game. I'd just delete that. Weavers don't need this extra little bit of quality of life. I would get rid of it. And that's it. That's all I can really think to say in terms of nerfs here. That's not Ellie favoritism. I honestly haven't really been playing very much Ellie lately. It's just hard to nerf something that I feel like is already in the pits. Next, we do get to buff something, and I could do an entire podcast purely on fresh air buffs that I think would be healthy. But instead of actually looking at fresh air specifically, instead of looking at Weaver specifically or anything really, I'm just going to look at Elementalists globally, since none of the elite specs or anything really has too much of a place. I'm going to look at the Fiery Greatsword, which I love. I think this is a brilliant skill, really well-defined animations and power level on it, but it is just such a long cooldown, unnecessarily long. I would drop the cooldown on this to 120. It might not seem creative right next to the Mesmer change that we just did a second ago, but I think that would do a lot for this class, and it would make Fresh Air feel a lot better. It would make other variants feel a lot better too. That would be my main buff for Ellie. It's maybe not the playstyle defining change you could be looking for in some of the other lines, but I think that would be a good start. I was tempted to buff Tempest as well, but I actually think Tempest's viability hinges entirely on its comparison to Firebrand rather than its own personal efficacy, and I don't want to power creep more sustain. So yeah. Let's get in on Necromancer, which has the one change, actually, on this video that not only am I making for PvP sake, but also I secretly like the idea of it in PvE too. So Necro has a handful of different builds available right now. There are the Reapers, which are extremely strong, you know, point blank power pressure. You've got Scourges, and within Scourges, you've got small shades with curses and big condition damage. You've got large shades with blood magic and more team support and whatnot. So I really like the place it's in, and as negative of a reception it's developed over the years since Path of Fire came out, I don't actually think a lot of it's justified. I think it's in an okay place, if not slightly too strong. The reason I think we don't see any other big DPSE team fighters on par with Necro at the moment is less to do with Necro and more to do with the options the other classes have available. So what do we do about Necro itself? Well, for my nerf, I do look at one of the Condi builds. I don't know whether I've actually got it equipped on this character, but Torch 5, basically. I would nerf Torch 5 to require a line of sight check. That's all. The Torch 5s going through walls and around corners in places that they really shouldn't really frustrates the hell out of me, especially considering a lot of other animations that I feel should have that and don't. I think it's unnecessary, and even without that line of sight check, as nice as it is, Scourges will still love to run that because of the life force generation on the 4, and you know, it's just a lot of burning and a lot of torment. I don't think it needs a line of sight check. It's frustrating and lame, and I want it gone from the game. So yeah, that would be my nerf. My shave as well would be looking at Reaper, which the higher level you play, I think it starts to fall off, but it is still extremely strong, and there's loads of them for casual ranked queues. Therefore, I think it is important to look at. And specifically, I'm going to look at Axe, which the devs have been relentlessly buffing since launch. I'm not going to change Ghastly Claws. Ghastly Claws is ridiculously power crept and does a ton of damage, but it's also one dodge roll and over, and you can kind of see and feel when Ghastly Claws is going on. What I don't like is how high the pressure the auto is. Axe is one of these zero animation, like there's no projectile travel times, there's none of that stuff. It's just like this invisible force that goes through the game, and that kind of stuff just feels kind of crappy, you know. It's not well advertised by itself. It does too much damage. I love the idea of this as a vulnerability stacker to trigger the two. And so that's what I would rather it stay as. My shave would be to nerf the damage on Rending Claws by a reasonable amount as well. Just keep dropping that down so that Necros will still want to auto, but it's not going to be a defining aspect, and they're not going to get so many chase kills just by autoing on Axe. That feels bad. Let's shuffle the power properly into Ghastly Claws, where people can actually make intelligent plays around. So there you go. That's the nerf and the shave. Lastly, what would I buff? I'm actually looking at Lich Form. My original idea for a buff for this was to drop its cooldown, and the devs did exactly that with a recent balance patch, so that was pretty cool, but I think it could use a little bit more. Lich, flavor and theme-wise, you know, there's Summoners of Undead, right? And so when we actually go into Lich, you will see that we get Summon Madness. This is a pretty cool skill. I'm trying to ping it here in local chat for when we leave. Repeatedly summon minions that explode after a period of time if they are not killed. This is kind of a dead skill in PvP at the moment. The autos for Lich Form are kind of fun. The 2 you use, the 5 you can use, the Fear and the Teleport you can even use. But this minion explodey one, this is kind of crap, and you don't really think about it or touch it. But it's a really interesting skill. Basically, these minions summon, and they blow up later if you leave them alive. And the explosion damage on a proper power spec thing is very high. So, I love the idea of these having a little bit more relevance with the game. The issue is that you can't, like, Lich Form and precast them before a fight and have them with you because they die super fast and, you know, on their own. And if you try and cast them in the middle of a fight, they tend to get cleaved out straight away. So my buff would be to summon Madness to do 2 things. First, increase the vitality of these minions so they can sustain long enough to trigger their explosions. And second, I would actually have them not automatically die. It still takes them like 6 seconds to wind up before they'll explode and deliver their big impact. But after the 6 seconds are done, they don't just fall over dead. They'll follow you around for the next however long, maybe until your next Lich Form. So you can actually just summon these minions wherever you are, and that idea of precasting if you want to do it or after a fight is relevant. The next time you engage on someone, you'll have these minions waiting in the wing, and they'll be like little nukes as they come along and explode on your enemy. You can only do it every 150 seconds whenever the elite comes up, and now from the perspective of an opponent, you see the Reaper or whatever coming towards you. If he's got those little minions, you can prioritize those and cleave them down first, or know to dodge and kite away a bit until they've left the battlefield. I think it's just a really cool skill, and there could be some fun counterplay with it, but it's not workable right now because they die too quick on their own, even if they're not triggering the proc, or they die too quick by being cleaved out in the fight. So we assess those 2, and I think Lich Form in general could see some fun usage. The cooldown drop might have been enough to get people using it more. You can see here I'm actually trying a Dust Lich build, but that dead skill 4 is kind of lame. So yeah, there you go. That's my attempt at a balanced pass, a realistic set of changes where I can only tweak one thing about each build and try and get as much impact on the meta as possible from them. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what maybe whiffed here, or what you would have done with your buff option. What is the single biggest change you can enact with any of these builds with just a single buff, and why is it not too far? I'd love to hear. Thanks guys, hope you enjoyed. See you next time.